Hi everyone, this is William from the Headphone Experience, and I'm here tonight with my first impressions of the Hifiman Mini Shangri-La headphone and headphone amp combination. These were loaned to me by Hifiman for review, and I will tell you right now, this is my first electrostatic headphone that I've ever heard or reviewed. So this is a little kind of a new thing for me. I've reviewed a lot of headphones, a lot of amps, but never electrostatic. And I will, in a moment, give you a brief description of what the difference is and how electrostatic headphones work. But first, I wanted to mention the price of these, and these are the current prices through Hifiman, and these prices are in US dollars. The headphone itself goes for $1,100, and let me set this down because I'm going to need two hands to hold up this amp that's pretty heavy. And this is the amp, which sells by itself for $1,500. And Hifiman does sell the combination at a discount, and the combined price of the headphone and the headphone amp is $2,300 US dollars. So this is an electrostatic headphone and an electrostatic amp, and they are made for each other. This is the mini Shangri-La system. And I personally did not know that there was a mini Shangri-La. I knew that there was the Shangri-La, the original, which is now referred to as the senior, which is a $50,000 headphone and amp combination. And then there's the Shangri-La Junior, which I believe sells for $8,000 for the headphone amp and headphone combination. And the Shangri-La Junior uses a hybrid tube amp, and the Shangri-La Senior, I believe, uses an all-tube amp, but this is a solid-state amp. So, like I said, this is the first time I've ever heard or reviewed an electrostatic headphone, so I'll try to give you a brief description of how that works. Okay. Basically, with headphones, you have three types of drivers. You have dynamic drivers, which were pretty much the standard, and most headphones were dynamic drivers until a few years ago when planar magnetic headphones really gained a lot of popularity, and a big part of that is through Hifiman. But anyway, a dynamic driver headphone uses usually a round, kind of a cone-shaped driver that is like a miniature speaker, and it has a voice coil, and the voice coil is surrounded by magnets, and your music, your analog signal runs through that voice coil and reacts with the magnets and causes the diaphragm or the cone of the little dynamic speaker to move in and out, and that movement causes your sound waves and creates your sound. Okay, planar magnetic headphones, and I've reviewed a lot of those, work differently. What they have is a diaphragm that it has etchings on it of usually aluminum or silver or some even gold, and a current runs through those etchings, and then there's a grid of magnets on usually both sides of the diaphragm. And what happens is when the current runs through those etchings on the diaphragm, it reacts with the magnets that are on both sides of the diaphragm, causes the diaphragm to vibrate, and once again, that creates your sound waves and your music that you actually hear. Okay, electrostatic headphones are similar to the planar magnetics, except they work in a different way. Number one, there's no magnets in the drivers on the planar magnetic headphone. I don't know if you can see in there at all, but it does have a different look, and it's very light. This feels like a headphone that has no drivers in it, like it's just an empty headphone. It's about 100 grams lighter than most dynamic driver or planar magnetic headphones. So it's really light because there's no magnets. And the way it works, I'll just try to give you a real simple explanation right now, and I'll go deeper into it in my full review. Like I said, this is just a first impression. So basically, you have a membrane in the middle, and that's covered with a conductive material. And the headphone amp creates what's called a bias voltage, which is a DC voltage, and the planar or the diaphragm receives a positive charge that is something in the range of like 550 to 650 volts. It's a very high voltage charge into that membrane in the middle. Then you have grid plates, basically like a metal mesh on both sides of the diaphragm, that you're with no magnets. And then your music, your signal, your analog signal, which is an alternating current, runs into those plates, and they alternate from, with the alternating current, they go positive, negative, negative, positive, back and forth. And that causes a static electric charge, and the diaphragm in the middle is repelled by the plate that has the positive charge and attracted to the plate with the negative charge. And then when the current reverses in your alternating current, it goes the other direction, because your plates that surround the diaphragm alternate between positive and negative with your alternating current. So that causes your diaphragm in the middle to be either repelled or attracted to the plates depending on the polarity. And that's what causes your movement of your diaphragm, once again, your sound waves. And it does it with no magnets. It uses static electricity at a high voltage to create the attraction and the repelling of the diaphragm instead of magnets. So I'll try to do a little more research and give you a more in-depth explanation of that when I do my full review. But for now, that's about as far as my understanding of planar magnetic, or not planar magnetic, electrostatic transducers go. So anyway, this is a headphone that uses electrostatic transducers, like I've been talking about. Hi-Fi Man with this setup uses what is pretty much, I guess, the industry standard of a bias voltage of 550 to 650 volts, which means this headphone is compatible with electrostatic amps from other companies, and this amp is compatible with electrostatic headphones from other companies. But I do want to point out, you cannot use an electrostatic headphone with a conventional amp, and you cannot use an electrostatic headphone amp with a conventional headphone, neither planar magnetic or dynamic drivers. It does not work. And the connections are different to keep you from connecting them, because you will destroy everything if you hook a conventional headphone to a electrostatic amp, or a electrostatic headphone to a conventional amp. So anyway, I mentioned that these headphones have no magnets in them, so they're super light. Hi-Fi Man claims a weight of 320 grams, and it was hard for me to check that because the cable is not removable on these. So the best I could figure out, trying to weigh this on my scale, that's real close, 320 grams. And that's about 100 grams lighter than, say, a Hi-Fi Man Aria, or the Aria Organic, or Aria Stealth, or even like the Anandas is about 100 grams lighter. It is a super light headphone. It has the basic, egg shape of the Hi-Fi Man headphones, but just super light. Like I said, it feels like they didn't put the drivers in this thing. Okay, I did weigh it with the cable included, and even with the cable, the weight came in at about 390 grams, and this plug on the end of it is where most of that weight is. The cable is kind of unique. It's flat. I don't know how many wires are in there. There's 5 conductors, so I'm assuming there's 5 wires in there. But anyway, and as you can see, the cable on this is not compatible with any conventional amps. It will not plug into a 4-pin XLR or a 3-pin XLR. It's completely different to keep you from plugging this headphone into a conventional amp. But like I said, total with the cable goes about 390 grams, but this part's going to be hanging on the amp, the heaviest part of the cable. So, like I said, very, very light headphones. Okay, the amp weighs in at about 12.8 pounds and is actually very heavy for its size. And you've probably noticed already, this looks a lot like a Hifiman EF400 combination amp DAC. And it does have a very similar look, but it's about twice as big and about twice as heavy as an EF400. And like I said, this weighs in at 12.8 pounds. It's 10 inches wide, which I think is about 1.5 inches wider than the EF400. It's 10.25 inches deep, including the knobs, and about 3.6 inches tall. And I'll try to give you a closer up look at both of these. First, I'm going to show you the headphone. And like I said, it has your conventional Hifiman egg-shaped ear cups, and actually looks a lot like maybe a Hifiman Ananda Nano, something like that. And I will point out that I am not crazy about this headband. This is the same headband that Hifiman uses on their $109 400 SE. And I personally think that an $1,100 headphone should have a nicer headband. If it were my choice, I think that this headphone should have the same headband that Hifiman uses on the Arias, the original Aria all the way through the Aria Organic, have a much nicer headband than this. And I was disappointed that Hifiman used this headband on the HE6 SE version 2, and I once again think they should have put a nicer headband on this. And a big part of that is the lack of swivel, where the Aria headbands swivel almost all the way around, and these have a little bit of swivel, but like I said, not my favorite Hifiman headband, and I think an $1,100 headphone should have the Aria headband. But I did mention the cable is non-detachable, and I'm assuming that's because of the extra wires required for the separate bias voltage and the music signal that's driving, or being fed to your drivers, or maybe just to keep you from hooking the wrong cable up to the headphone and using it with the wrong amp. It has tapered ear pads, thicker in the back, pretty much the same ear pads that you'd find on like the Anandas or the Arias from Hifiman. And nothing else is really different. It's pretty much, a very simple design, very basic. I don't know if I can get the light just right so you can see the driver or not. It does have a different look to it, but I can't tell in the camera if I'm getting the angle right or not. Okay, let me show you the amp. And like I said, it's like an EF400, but about twice the size and twice the weight. Over here, you have your control that switches your inputs, either RCA analog or balanced 3-pin XLR analog. And then over here you have your volume control. And I did want to mention that the volume control has steps in it, and it only has 24 steps. And that's pretty much okay, except occasionally what'll happen is one step's a little bit too quiet and the next step is a little bit too loud. Because there's only 24 steps, there is a pretty big jump in volume between one step to the next. So the solution I came up with to that problem is the DAC I was using has adjustable output. You can drop the output level like a half a decibel at a time. So what I do is I set this up to the next volume level where it's a little bit too loud, and then I can drop the volume anywhere from a half a decibel to, a couple decibels, whatever I need on the DAC, which is lowering the output from the DAC into this amp, and that drops the volume a little bit. So I can fine tune the volume from the DAC, and you can do that if you have a DAC with an adjustable output. And a lot of DACs have that, some don't, but I did want to mention that the jump between these volume steps is, I don't know what it is. I'm assuming it's probably at least 2 decibels, maybe 3 decibels, and can be a pretty big jump. And you can try to kind of put it in between the volume knob, in between the steps. But if you do, sometimes you get an imbalance from one side to the other, from one channel to the other. One channel will be louder than the other. So you pretty much need to leave it on the steps, and not try to put it in between. So let me show. Oh, and then you have your 2 5-pin electrostatic headphone outputs on this. And once again, you can't plug a conventional headphone into those. And then on the back, you've got your 2 sets of inputs, either RCA single-ended or XLR balanced. And then over here, you have your AC 120 volt input and your power switch on the back here. So you do have to reach over the top to hit the volume. And you got some vents on the bottom. That's about it. And I did want to mention that this gets pretty hot. Not too hot to touch, but hot enough that you don't want to have anything else sitting on top of it. And I'd advise leaving a little bit of space around this. This actually gets hot to the point that it's almost uncomfortable to put your hand on top of it. So it does create quite a bit of heat, because my understanding is that electrostatic headphones do need quite a bit of power. They're not super efficient, so this amp is generating a lot of power and putting off some pretty serious heat. So before I get into the sound of these, I did want to mention the equipment I used, and I'm using, up to this point, Cambridge Audio CD 540C CD player used as a transport only, and I'm running a digital signal from that into a topping D70S MQA version DAC, which happens to be my favorite topping DACs. I've reviewed most of Topping's higher end DACs, and I actually prefer the D70S MQA to the newer D70 Pro, or even the D90 ES or SE or whatever it is. I actually prefer the D70. It's got measures pretty close, almost as well as the newer ones, but it has a warmer, richer, almost R2R sound to it. And then headphones that I've compared to this so far. Once again, this is only my first impression. I've compared 3 headphones to it. The Hifiman HE6 SE version 2, the Hifiman HE1000 SE, and the Hifiman Susvara, and that is the original Susvara. Okay, where are we at? Let's talk about the sound. Okay, I'm going to start with the tone balance. I would describe the tone balance of this headphone amp combination as pretty much as dead neutral as I've ever heard. And to give you an example of what I consider a dead neutral headphone, I would say the Hifiman Sundara. Not the Susvara, but the Sundara. I would say the Sundara is pretty much what I would consider dead neutral, pretty flat. Well, this is even more flat, I think. This thing just is dead flat in tone balance. So there is no bass emphasis, there's no V shape, there's no treble emphasis, just dead flat. And I'll tell you right now, if you're a bass head, this is probably not the headphone for you. Although I'm assuming I could throw an EQ in this, I could EQ it between my DAC and my input here, and I haven't tried doing that yet, so I might do that in the future. I might try and see how this headphone reacts in EQ. I've got the shit low-key, the original, the mini 4-band EQ, and I might try seeing what happens, if I put a little bass boost on this. But so far I haven't done that. So right now, absolutely dead neutral. Okay, as far as extension into the bass and the treble. Starting with the treble, this thing extends as high as my hearing will allow me to go. I'm sure it goes much higher. At my age, I'm lucky if I can hear anything above 15,000 hertz, and I'm sure that there's no roll off at that point. Probably goes much higher in the treble. As far as the bass, theoretically, I don't think there is a roll off in the bass, but there is no emphasis in the bass. So to me, it kind of sounds like the sub bass kind of rolls off. The sub bass, without having any emphasis, is there, but it doesn't have a lot of weight to it. So my actual listening impression is that there is some roll off in the sub bass, and I'm not hearing a lot of sub bass, but like I said, theoretically, I think it's there. It's just that because it's not emphasized, it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have a lot of weight, and it gives me the impression that the sub bass rolls off. Okay, starting with the bass, and I'm talking sub bass, mid bass, the whole bass. Okay, the bass is extremely tight, extremely well controlled, but once again has no emphasis. So it's there, but it doesn't have a whole lot of weight to it. Once again, not a headphone for bass heads. And like I said earlier, this is my first review of a electrostatic headphone, and electrostatic headphones do not have a reputation for being bass heavy. They have a reputation of being very neutral, and people that love a lot of bass usually are not attracted to electrostatic headphones and amps. But the bass, like I said, it's there, and it's pretty good, and it seems adequate most of the time to me. I'm not a bass head, but I usually prefer about maybe 3 decibels of bass emphasis on a neutral headphone, or something like the Aria Organic, to me, has about the perfect amount of bass. So, depending on the recordings, a lot of recordings I find the bass very good. On other recordings, it's coming up a little bit short, in my opinion, but once again, this is a neutral headphone and it's playing what is on the recording. It's not emphasizing the bass. Okay, the mids. Once again, very neutral, very linear all the way through the mids. In my opinion, slightly on the dry sound side of neutral, a little bit dry sounding, and I think that's a typical characteristic of electrostatic headphones, because they're so fast. The movement of the diaphragm is so fast that they can sound a little bit on the dry side, a little bit on the sterile side. The sound has kind of an analytical sound to it, but I'm not saying that in a bad way, because some headphones can sound very analytical, but it to me sounds bad. This I would describe as kind of sterile and kind of analytical, but it's actually, this headphone's, it's a strong point. It's a really good thing, because it's just bringing out exceptional levels of detail, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, the treble, it is there. This headphone is full of treble, very sparkly, very extremely clean, undistorted treble. Some people could consider it a little on the bright side. I personally don't, but I like Hifiman treble, and I like my treble slightly on the bright side. But if you're one of those people that Hifiman treble is too bright to you, this once again, may be too bright, but exceptionally clean, sparkly treble with no distortion. And because it's so clean and undistorted, even though it's a little bright, it doesn't cause me any listening fatigue. Where distorted treble, even at lower level, will cause me listening fatigue. Okay, detail. This headphone and amp is all about detail. This thing just has crazy amounts of detail. I'm talking like Hi-Fi Man Susvara amounts of detail. Not Sundara, but Susvara, the Hi-Fi Man $6,000 headphone. I'm talking about the original again. That is the level of detail this thing is putting out. And I told you I compared a couple of other headphones to this. This out details the Hi-Fi Man HE6 SE version 2, which is an extremely detailed headphone. And I would say this even slightly out details the Hi-Fi Man HE1000 SE, which until I heard the Susvara was the most detailed headphone I've ever heard. So this thing details on the level of the Susvara. Okay, and then as far as speed, this headphone's ability to go from one note to the other, transition from one sound to another, may even be beyond the Susvara. It's up there, similar to the Susvara, maybe, and I don't have a whole lot of time in this, and I didn't spend a lot of time comparing this to the Susvara, because once again, this is just a first impression. But the speed of this may be beyond even the Susvara, but that's what electrostatic headphones are known for. Okay, soundstage. Soundstage on this thing is huge. Way, way bigger than the soundstage on the HE6. Okay, similar soundstage on this in width and depth to the HE1000 SE or the Susvara. Incredible large soundstage on this. Imaging, extremely pinpoint. You know exactly where each instrument is coming from. Separation of instruments, incredible. Absolutely outstanding separation. Each instrument is completely separate and distinct from the others. And once again, probably outdoes the HE1000 SE as far as separation and is up there alongside the Susvara as far as separation. Okay, comfort, about half the weight of the HE6 SE version 2, about 100 grams lighter than either the 1000 SE or the Susvara, very light. Still have that issue with the egg-shaped ear cups that I don't really like because they ride a little low. But this is pretty much one of the lightest headphones I've ever tried. I mean, this thing's like the weight of like a Grotto SE80 or something like that. Extremely lightweight. Okay, so I've told you that the detail of this thing is up on Susvara level. Do I think that this headphone and amp competes directly with the Susvara? No. Okay, I don't think this would ever replace the Susvara as my favorite Hi-Fi Man headphone. The Susvara I awarded Best Headphone Any Price in my last year's awards at the end of the year. Okay, what the Susvara can do that this can't. The Susvara has a warmer, richer sound to it. The Susvara has more weight to the mid bass. The Susvara has more extension into the sub bass, but the Susvara is quite a bit heavier. And the Susvara is $6,000, where this headphone alone is $1,100, or you can get the amp and the headphone for $2,300. The Susvara, you're going to need at least probably $1,000 amp with that. So you're looking at pretty much 3 times for a Susvara and a decent amp. So this is far cheaper. So you can get into the detail capabilities of the Susvara for about a third the price. You're just not going to get that deep sub bass of the Susvara, and you're not going to get that rich, warm mid-range of the Susvara. But as far as detail, just absolute crazy detail out of this. And, you know, I mean, there's no other headphones other than the Susvara that I've ever reviewed that are on the level of detail, clarity, resolution of this headphone. And maybe someday in the future, I'll get to review some other planar magnetics, because that's what they're known for, is their level of detail. Okay, when I come back with my full review, what I want to do is I want to compare this to some other options in the same price range. Because at $2,300 right now, you can get a lot from Hifiman for $2,300. And a couple of examples are, you could get the HE1000 SE and have $600 left to spend on an amp, which would get you into like an EF600, which would have a built-in DAC, which you still need a DAC with this system. Okay, or for the price of this, you could get an HE1000 Stealth and have $1,200 left to invest in an amp. Or you could get a Hifiman Aria Organic and have $1,300 left to invest in an amp. So what I'm going to do before my full review is compare this system to those three options and see how this compares to those and which I would pick at that price point of $2,300. But once again, if you've already have an electrostatic amp, you can use this headphone for $1,100 with that amp. Or if you already have an electrostatic headphone, you can use this amp at $1,500 with that headphone. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I'll be back. I can't make any guarantees when I'll get my full review out on this. I'm in the busy season of lawn care, so I have to work for a living first and do reviews second. But anyway, I'll get back to you with my full review as soon as I can. Once again, this is William from the Headphone Experience. If this video helped you, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. Please join us at the Headphone Experience on Facebook. It is up to over 36,000 members. And once again, thanks for watching my video.